I'm showing 11:02, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us today for our first Ask the HR Expert webinar series, answering your HR questions. My name is Marcus Wilbers, and I'm the Chief Client Officer and General Counsel of Tandem HR, and I'm going to serve as the moderator today. I have been at Tandem for 2.5 years, and I've worked with Tandem for over 5 years. I'm a former employment lawyer, benefit compliance consultant, and PEO founder. Today, we're going to be covering the HR questions that you submitted when you registered for this webinar, as well as common questions that we've experienced with clients and any questions that might come up during the course of today's discussion. So while we have muted the audience, we welcome and actually encourage you to submit questions throughout today's webinar. Using the Q&A section or in the comment section of the webinar. We'll try our best to answer them during the discussion. We want this to be as interactive and informative as possible. So if there's something that you're thinking about as we discuss these questions, please let us know. It'll give us a chance to address those directly for you. If we're unable to get to them due to time or because the question raises something very personal, we'll reach out to you individually after the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will get a copy of it after we conclude today. So no worries about taking notes or anything like that. So those are, I think, the general housekeeping rules. So let's get to your HR questions. I'm going to start with a general question, and I want each of the panelists to answer it. But in doing so, I'm going to ask the panelists to just give a quick introduction about themselves and then go on and answer the question. So first up, the question is, what has been the biggest challenge you have faced working in HR, and how did you handle or address it? So, Lauren, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Yeah, Marcus, I'd be happy to. Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren Dorlag. I am the Director of HR Client Relations here at Tandem HR. I've been with Tandem for 3 years. Love working with our clients. Prior to that, I worked in a couple of different industries. So have about 12 years of experience working in HR, the last 3 of those being at Tandem HR. Great question. So the biggest challenge working in HR, I think for me, it's balancing the administrative tasks that come with HR and also making room or building processes so that I can still be strategic. So for me, and in my experience as an HR partner, where I've been the most successful and can best support operations is when I have a seat at the table, when I'm involved in the operation, when I understand the business so that I can give, higher level support and truly help the business succeed. So there's a lot that goes into HR. And so, I think for me, that's been one of the biggest challenges is making sure that there are processes in place so that we can get the administrative tasks done, that those are handled seamlessly, but that there's still a chance to impact operations with things like succession planning and performance reviews and culture and those parts of HR that are equally important.
Great. How about Eric? You want to take a stab at that one too?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been with Tandem HR 5+ years. Prior to Tandem, I was with a smaller PEO for 6 years. And I'm one of the managers on the HR client relations team here. Excited to have everybody here and talk with everybody. So for me personally, I've been in the PEO space for 10+ years now, and finding that subtle balance between managing employee relations, managing performance expectations, while also mitigating risk has been, the biggest challenge for me, but also my biggest development since entering this career. So it happens every day. A client will call me and say, "Hey, Eric, I have a problematic employee who I just can't deal with anymore, and I want to terminate them today." When I was younger in my career, and maybe Marcus can understand this a little, I worked with him when I started here. It was difficult for me to place myself in the shoes of the actual client or manager who lives day in, day out and breathes that problem. So when I was younger, I would just kind of give direction and give a recommendation just based on what I heard. Sometimes I would disagree and let the client know I don't think termination is a good option at that time. During those years, it was not the best experience for myself or the client based on the approach at that time. However, as I evolved as an HR professional, I learned a much better approach in dealing with clients and decision makers. What I learned was that being a great listener, leading with empathy and educating our clients was a much better approach to get them to see why my decision recommendation was what it was. So high level, if I was able to, kind of understand their concerns, understand their business needs better, provide them data to support my recommendations, and, put the potential risks that come along with the termination at that given time, and just show empathy in conveying my message, I was able to get them to kind of see my point of view and be more understanding. So not everyone's going to agree with HR's decision at that point in time, but when they see your decisions and recommendations play out, that's where trust and confidence comes into play. And that's my goal for working with our clients. So.
Yeah, I think as you're talking about that, Eric, the thing that I kept thinking about was balancing the short-term and long-term consequences of decisions. So the client day in, day out is working with a problematic employee and they've had enough, they want to get rid of them.
Yeah.
And I think that's very understandable, but part of your role is to educate on the longer term consequences that, we might solve this immediate problem, but there are risks that could go along with that could play out over the course of months and years. And you got to balance them. And there's, very rarely, cut and dried answers. So it's balancing those short and long-term risks.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Jackie, do you want to take a swing at this one too?
I can. Thanks, Marcus. Yeah, I can. My name is Jackie Anderson. I am what is my title now these days? It is client relations manager. I'm recently promoted into this role. So I'm a peer of Eric's. Little history about myself. I've been in tactical HR for about 15 plus years. I want to overdate myself. Most of that has been in internal HR. I've recently come into the PEO space. I love the PEO space. So I also hold my PHR and a master's in organizational management. So when I first heard this question, I immediately went back to the good old days of the pandemic. And now post-pandemic, and specifically remote work, and how the moving to remote work, flexible work arrangements. My former employer and a lot of my clients always insisted that the work that they do is internal, that it can't be remote eligible. But it was very funny how they were able to quickly pivot when they needed to, and they had the tools available, found the tools available to do that, to be able to quickly adapt policies and procedures and support those remote employees, address communication challenges, collaboration, productivity, work-life balance. All those things kind of came at us really quickly. I think the world did a great job at doing that. And I think HR was very instrumental in doing that. And now on the flip side, now that we have that somewhat behind us, now we're bringing people back to work. So we have the same challenge, just the opposite direction. And so, you've got your flip side of people who are tired of looking at their four walls and are dying to get back to work. And there's people who they really adapted to their current lifestyle and don't want to see any change. So there needs to be some type of common ground, some balance that's created, and providing reasonable explanation for returning to the office, a respectful way of doing so, and respecting personal choices, but also respecting what the employer is asking as well. So still too soon to see where all that lands, but we continue to work through those challenges. So that's been the fun I've been having the last few years.
Yeah, it's really, I think the pandemic has opened up a lot of issues that companies had to address that, they probably never thought of before. Remote work being one, keeping employees safe in the workplace being another. And it's kind of amazing how much you can adapt when you have to.
When you have to, exactly.
Yeah, doesn't make it easier.
Yep. But we all learned how to pivot really quickly.
Right. All right. Well, Kirk, how about you?
Sure. Thanks, Marcus. Good day, everyone. So my name is Kirk Davis. I am also a director of the HR Client Services team here at Tandem. I have been with Tandem just about a year now, but previous to that, I was an employment attorney and an HR consultant with my own business. So I have seen the gamut of HR issues over the last 15 years plus. Jackie, I relate to that statement. Don't want to date myself too well, but also want to establish that groundwork of haven't done this for a little bit of time. So I think one of the biggest challenges that I see in the PEO space, especially, is navigating that relationship between a good partner with your clients. Being able to recognize that you don't always see the day-to-day issues that your client is facing and struggling with, kind of referring back to what Eric said, they're in the weeds, but being able to be a true partner to them. So to bring resources to the table, bring solutions, partner with them on maybe something that didn't start out exactly like how you had crafted it, but maybe had to change and adapt to become a solution that was an acceptable solution for the client as well. So I think a couple of words that have been thrown out so far, I want to grab onto, and that is trust and relationship. So establishing that relationship helps you develop an ongoing trust with the client. And the more and more interactions and kind of digging in deep that you have with them enables and equips you to be good partners and kind of coming to those solutions together. So I think getting in, kind of sniffing around, trying to understand the relationship and the work environment with each individual client is incredibly important in helping to craft solutions.
Yeah, that's I'll just chime in on my perspective too. I think the relationship aspect is really important for me. It's really fulfilling for me, but it's also very challenging because relationships, you go through ups and downs, and I'm a people person, so I love to, I gravitate toward that. That's what I love about HR, but this is, relationships with boundaries. And it's sometimes uncomfortable or not always clear how to set those boundaries, or, hey, I'm having a discussion with you, but it's really not my place to have that discussion. You should really have that with your manager, or, kind of redirecting or putting boundaries around the relationship. So, it's the pro and the con. The thing that I love about it, the thing that's the most challenging too, for me. All right, so that was a very general question to kind of get us going. We're going to move now to a very specific question, and this is one that was submitted by our registrants. How do you see AI, artificial intelligence, affecting the future of work? This is something that I think a lot of industries are asking right now. You can read a lot of articles on it, and we're kind of right at the cusp of this being, daily life technology. But how do you see it applying to just the future of work? So, Eric, do you want to kick us off there, or Lauren, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I can start this one, Marcus. Yeah. Kind of just a very applicable aspect that I've seen it is AI has really changed the game with recruiting. So like you said, we're starting to see this permeate more into all aspects of life and work. But being an HR professional, I see it a lot with recruiting. So really AI has helped take a ton of time consuming just work and scanning resumes and vetting candidates. Not to say that we don't still want to be very close to that, but, gone are the days of getting a stack of 200 resumes and going through and highlighting, looking for keywords. AI can do a lot of that. So, and what I've seen, applicant tracking systems are really helpful, and they can be customized of what do you want to get out of the AI. So you're not removed from the process. It's not like a robot's hiring your people. It's just doing some of that really time consuming heavy lifting. I was reading an article recently in the last week or so, and it was just something I hadn't really thought about, and how AI helps with recruiting as well is eliminating that unconscious bias. So we as humans, we all have it. It's not anything we need to be ashamed of. We need to keep it in check, but we all have unconscious bias as humans. And AI can really help look subjectively, very subjectively. You can point out those key things that you want in a candidate. So not only is it time consuming, but it can help remove some of that perception that someone could inadvertently put on a candidate. Sorry to jump in, Eric. I know we've talked about this before and you have some thoughts on it as well.
Yeah, and my viewpoint is more of a broader scope, how AI is going to affect the workforce. And during my research, and I think most of us may have at one point in the past, or in the past few years, have seen something on social media or in the news outlets, and I will tell you, it's certainly been overhyped, the displacement of jobs in the upcoming years. Now, not gonna say that that's not definitely a concern and on the elimination of certain jobs in certain industries. But from what I have seen more recently and read and seen on some news outlets and some interviews with certain high profile technology executives, CEOs, if you will, and also a study by the World Economic Forum suggests by 2025 AI technology will create 12 million more jobs than it actually destroys. So some examples of those jobs, data analysts, scientists, AI and computer engineers, digital marketing strategists. So those jobs and those specific industries are expected to exponentially grow in the upcoming years. So in addition to that, AI will continue to free up employees to use their time more creatively and be more strategic. We could look to Alexa and Siri for some of us to perform routine tasks like, scheduling our appointments, answering specific questions, analyzing certain data. And then with that, employers can use that productivity time elsewhere. And I actually work with a client who's in the legal field, and they shared with me that they actually have technology that, and Marcus and Kirk, I don't know if you've seen this or not, but they actually have technology that will look at a specific court document, which I think we all know can be very lengthy at times, and they can put in some kind of algorithm to the technology that will find specific language immediately, which expedites the process for finding certain information that's needed for said process. So it's pretty cool. It's again up, increasing productivity and just creating more time to be used elsewhere. So that's kind of where I see this AI going.
Yeah, I think it's something that people are still figuring out. And I think, if I don't have a lot of familiarity with AI, but if you're like me and you don't have a lot of familiarity with it and it can be kind of nebulous, it's, I want to try and push myself to learn more about it because our competitors are going to be using it. And so I think it's just going to become kind of a fact of life that we can't ignore. And Lauren, to your point about, AI kind of being a check on unconscious bias. There's a really good Malcolm Gladwell book that talks about sometimes the more information you have, the worse decision you make because you get sidetracked with information that's not relevant or that skews your perception on things. So it's a data point, but it's something that I think can be really helpful. Yeah. All right. Next question we got is about performance reviews. So this was submitted by a registrant. How can you create a performance review system that does not include ratings? So Kirk, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, no, I love that topic. So let's dig in for a little bit. Everybody wants performance reviews. Everybody wants feedback, I believe. I think even if the feedback conversations can sometimes be difficult, but let's address the question and then I'll dive in a little bit deeper. So how do we develop a performance appraisal system that doesn't include numbers, right? So this is something that is one of those kind of archaic systems that we've always done it this way. Everybody's got that form document that scales somebody from a 5 to a 1. And I would encourage everyone to, one, ask the question about what fits your culture. What is going to be the perfect tool to use with your unique culture in your workspace? Because some cultures don't align with rating somebody on a 1 to 5. It's more casual. It's more day-to-day. So the first step, I think, is we have to look at what is going to be the perfect fit. The second one is, I would say, blow up those performance reviews and let's talk about evaluating people's performance on a more recent kind of timetable. So I know there's various opinions on this. If you look at the SHRM studies, quarterly reviews are kind of recognized as a best practice. But I would say the long and short of a performance review is we should be giving real-time feedback. People want to know how they can improve. They want to know if they're doing something wrong, and they want an opportunity to fix that. So we should be addressing those performance reviews with real-time feedback that's giving specific measurements making sure that we're doing that more frequently so that we can hold people accountable. Another very important piece to the performance appraisal is linking it to the actual metrics. So people need to know what the expectations are. You can't just go in and say you're a 4 and not give them any context for what that means. So we need to make sure that people know that when your behaviors are not giving you the results that you want, you know where that aligns or where we need to see behavior shift and move. So I could speak for a long time on this one, but I'll let other people jump in.
I just have one quick thought on it, Kirk. I think I agree with everything you said. And just one piece to add is, you're right, feedback, it shouldn't be a surprise. So it shouldn't come in a quarterly review where you kind of, outline all of this feedback. And so where I think it starts is really having routine one-to-ones. So if you don't have a cadence of having frequent check-ins, like we can all say that, yes, we should be giving feedback regularly, but we need to make sure we carve out that space and that we have that dedicated time with our team, our direct reports, whomever it is. So, that's one thing that's always been important to me as a leader that I've always advised people is that performance review really starts with having trust with your team, having regular conversations, and having an avenue for two-way feedback as well. So just something quick to add.
And Lauren, if I can just piggyback on that. So agree, those one-on-one meetings are super important, and prioritizing them too. Those are meetings that we're all busy and we all need to rejuggle our schedules once in a while. But if anything you can do to not reshuffle those, because they need to be important, and your employee needs to see that it's important to them too.
Yeah, and I'll just add, just reinforce the one-on-one. I have one-on-ones with my entire team every 2 weeks. And then additionally, to prepare, I ask my team to come with an agenda. Sometimes it's longer, sometimes it's shorter, sometimes it's a quicker one-to-one. But just to prepare, and there's a meaningful intent in each one-to-one, I ask my team to just give me a heads up and prepare an agenda for our meeting. And this is their time to speak with me about whatever's going on and what's on their mind. So it's really critical, those one-to-ones.
Yeah, I want to talk about two things there. One is the documentation of the review. So one-on-ones, I think, there's a free flow of information. You're giving honest feedback on someone's performance. You're addressing issues so that they don't become big issues. You address them as they arise. And so you may not need to document. I think the agendas are good because you can see what you discuss, but reviews, my opinion, need to be documented so that you can refer back to them. And I think everyone on this call has probably been in a situation where, or at least on the panel, where you're asked to advise on a separation or a termination. Well, what are their reviews like? Well, their last review was glowing. It was fantastic. And I get that giving negative feedback or critical feedback is uncomfortable, but you're really not doing anyone any favors if you just give them positive feedback. Again, that's kind of the short and long-term consequence thing. It may be good in the short term. You avoid that difficult conversation, but it's really meant, the reviews aren't meant to create a paper trail for letting someone go. They're meant to give someone feedback on how they can raise their performance. And I think we'd all agree it's much more cost effective. There's more return on investment to get someone to raise their performance than to turn that position over. That's much better. So that's one point, documenting it. So whether you do that on paper, whether you do that on an electronic performance review system, paper's cumbersome, so I prefer an electronic system, but somewhere that needs to be documented so that you can refer back to it. The other point is not letting feedback sit, and I think that's where the one-on-ones are important. I'll just speak from personal experience. I had one of my first professional jobs out of law school is actually at a law firm in an employment law department, but I got my annual review, and there were things on there that, like, I wish, God, just tell me that. And I would have addressed it. Now what happens is that happened 6 months ago and it showed up on my review and it was a surprise. Well, now I don't necessarily trust you because you could have just told me that, and I felt blindsided by it. So giving that review, again, it might be uncomfortable to give critical feedback, but much, much better for the long-term health of the relationship. We do have a question on this, and Kirk, I might direct this to you. If you don't have ratings in performance reviews, how do you fairly award comp increases? How do you tie comp increases to reviews if you don't have some sort of a rating metric in place?
Great question. So there's two things I would say on that is one, first and foremost, you don't always have to, these performance evaluations do not always have to directly link to compensation. So compensation can be a separate metric. It can be a separate discussion. So having these routine performance discussions can kind of stand alone from where you measure and what you do organizationally by way of compensation. Secondly, if you don't have the metrics, what I would recommend is that you spell out the behaviors that you're looking for. So it doesn't necessarily have to have a number, but it does need to say, these are the behaviors, they align to our core values, and these are the things that we have as far as expectations, so that people know that, hey, when I'm not doing something, when I'm talking behind my colleague's back, or I'm doing these things, it doesn't align with the company value of trust and respect. So we can spell those things out, list specific behaviors, and kind of address them in that way, but not necessarily tie them to a 1 to 5 metric.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think to the ratings, the 1 to 5, like, well, you're a 1 or a 3 or whatever, it's a data point, but I think more meaningful are metrics, like actual business metrics. And I know about that. Just, I think we've experienced that on the panel. We've moved to that at Tandem, more of metrics like responsiveness, resolution times, like, how quickly are you responding to clients and things like that. So you're taking some of the subjectivity out of it, where 1 to 5 could be like, well, I got up this morning, I didn't have a good cup of coffee, and so I'm grumpy, and I'm going to give you a 3. So anyway,
one more
ahead.
thing real quick, Marcus, and I'll just tie this back to something that Lauren said, is you also remove that kind of unconscious bias if you take out the metric system, and kind of just use those metrics that are more fact-based and less subjective, because then you're looking at, like you said, those specific things that we've set organizationally, as opposed to, well, I'm getting ready to determine whether Lauren is going to get a raise, but recently she pissed me off, so I'm not gonna give her a 5, I'm gonna give her a 4. But 3 months ago, I was talking about how amazing she was because we were working on this project together. So I think it does those kind of things as well.
Yeah, good point. And it's a whole nother discussion, I think, like, what should the metrics be? But there are a lot of books that talk about that. And I think the process of setting up the metrics really force, entrepreneurs or business owners or business leaders to really understand their business and what they want from each key, from each position that works in the business. So you got to think really critically about the business, and that's tough to do. Another question about reviews. And Eric, I'll see if you can answer this one. Do you have standard questions that you ask during a one-on-one, or is it more free flow? Or you said you have the employees set an agenda. So do you balance those, or how do you approach it?
Yeah, so I have a template that I use. Again, it can be edited and changed, if you will, on a given week. And again, one of the questions can be so I'll just kind of go into, there's 4 sets of questions I ask every one-to-one. So it's, how would you like to spend our time today? Second question is, how engaged do you feel with the organization and your book of business clients? And I rate that 1 through 5. And then, what can we do to support your professional development goals and any status updates on those goals? And then, what feedback do you have for the department, organization, and myself? So those are 4 standard questions that I ask each and every time. Now, some of them may not have the same answer, or will have the same answer every one-to-one, but over time you could see the progression and measure the responses based on, the HRBP on my team. So it gives me some good feedback to look back on during my one-to-ones, and then during the time when there's a review, a more formal review, I can use these as some documentation to support, the annual review. So those are my 4 set questions I ask each one-to-one.
Anyone else have a different approach on one-to-ones?
I don't necessarily have a different approach, but just a kind of some additional things that I probably do a little bit, not differently, but this is my opportunity to build a relationship with my team. And so, finding out a little bit more about them, asking them how they like to be communicated with, because everyone's very different on how they receive communication and how they like to be recognized for different things. And I always end it with, what else can I do for you? So similar to what Eric was saying, what can I do to support you? Is there anything else that I can do? Or if I can't do it, what can I escalate to take further up? So it's that team building, relationship building that's really important here as well. Because I don't know what I don't know. They don't know what they don't know, right? And that just cascades.
The only other thing I'd add, Marcus, and I wouldn't say I ask this every time, but I think what can be really helpful, depending on the individual you're leading, if they are in a very independent role, or if it's a role you have a lot of collaboration with, you don't always see the great things that your team is doing. You're not copied on every email, you're not in every meeting that they're in, you're not on whatever your industry is, you're not working side by side with them. So I think it's helpful just to ask, and sometimes this can be hard for people to share, but it's like, what are you really proud of? What do you want to tell me about? What are your wins? I think that's also really helpful to see for those folks that, you just don't see their performance day in and day out, to get a good idea of what they're exceeding at. And then similarly, do you have any roadblocks? Like, is there any roadblock, whether it's a process that we need to revisit, whether it's a capital problem, a technology problem, like, are there roadblocks that we need to know about and work to eliminate so they can be successful?
Yeah, that's good. I asked the roadblock one, but I actually do the inverse of the what are you proud of? It's like what's bugging you, or what, I really try to go at the like what's bothering you. My thought is like, people are going to feel how they feel, and if they don't vent to me, they're going to vent somewhere. I'd rather know about it directly so I can address it, or at least have an actual pulse on what's happening. So this is a really good discussion. Any last words on reviews or one-on-ones? No? All right. Let's move on. EAPs, employer assistance programs, employer or employee assistance programs. How important is it to have an EAP for your team? Does anyone want to kick us off?
I'll jump into that. So I think it's really important for organizations to understand the value that an EAP program brings to their organization. One, it's often a very low or no cost option to the organization that provides a lot of support that perhaps you individually as a leader do not want to engage in with your employees. All kinds of issues come up with addictions and problems and things that employees may not feel comfortable raising with you directly, but need support on. And you can recognize behaviors that maybe support pushing them or nudging them in that direction. It's just a great resource for people. We all know, kind of going back to Jackie's point earlier with the pandemic, people are operating at a different level, dealing with different issues than they've ever struggled with in the workforce. Isolation is higher than it's ever been. So providing that as a resource to them to have a safe space to go and seek counseling, to seek support. We all know that is a huge need. We see it every day in this business. It is a human relationship driven business, and there are all kinds of complexities as it relates to that. So it's just an invaluable resource, in my opinion, because it's easy, it's cheap, it's accessible, and it's something that people can get great support at and really provide them the help that maybe you don't want to directly address, because there could be legal complexities getting into issues with addiction or other issues that you don't want to tackle head on. And quite frankly, don't have the expertise to do.
Yeah, as you were talking, Kirk, I was thinking about my challenge with HR is, keeping the relationships, putting boundaries around the relationship so that I want to support you. I want to do what I can for you, but I can't have a conversation with you about your addiction, for example, because then that changes the nature of our relationship. Yeah. I'm going to move on. We got another question submitted before the webinar. So this one's very specific, and I want to address it specifically, but then I'm wondering if we could take it a little bit broader too. So the question is, what are the requirements for compliance with employees in Illinois? Bit of a loaded question. I'm not sure that we have enough time remaining in this webinar or any other hour-long webinar to do a comprehensive list, but who wants to kick us off with that?
Yeah, right. Buckle up. I'll take the last 20 minutes to answer this one. But in all seriousness, I'm really glad someone asked this question, because there's a lot. There's a lot to digest here. There's a lot of different compliance requirements. What doesn't make it easy as well is who these laws or regulations or whatever it is, who they apply to varies based on where you are, how many employees you have. And it changes. You guys have all brought up COVID, and I'm having flashbacks, right, to even how often it changed with legislation with COVID. But let me just share a couple that we see a lot. And honestly, these are things that I've spent a lot of time on lately, so they're top of mind for me. But one is, so if you weren't aware, Illinois requires mandatory preventing sexual harassment training for all employees. Doesn't matter how many employees you have. If you are an employee in Illinois, you are required legally to take preventing sexual harassment training. Like I said, been spending a lot of my time on that lately, working with clients to build those programs. There's also there's something called the Illinois Equal Pay Act, and that in itself is not new, but there's a new compliance requirement that requires covered employers. Again, I'm not going to go into all the specifics of what that is, but specific employers that they need to submit an application and receive a certificate from the state of Illinois. So the long and short is the Illinois Pay Act prohibits employers from paying unequal wages to men and women, a great law. But new legislation with action that employers have to actually take, like I said, to submit an application, get a certificate if they're covered by that. Lastly, this is one that our participants might have seen in the news lately. This is a recent one, but Illinois recently passed, starting Jan 1, 2024. Certain employers, if you're covered, are required to provide paid leave. And that paid leave can be used for any reason. There's a lot that goes into this one. There's a lot to digest and a lot to unpack for employers to make sure that they have policies. Employers might have existing leave policies already, and that's great. But before, that was not a law in Illinois to require that. So lots that will go into kind of building and developing that. So like I said, in all seriousness, I will not take the last 20 minutes and tell you all about it. There's a lot. Those are just kind of 3 recent ones that have come across my plate.
Yeah, and I'll jump in there, Lauren.
Yeah.
So as Lauren mentioned, we do Illinois, the state of Illinois does have its own harassment prevention training requirements. Now, more recently, Chicago, and I jokingly say this, that Chicago will become a state within the state of Illinois here probably in the next few years. They actually passed amended the human rights ordinance, creating a more stricter training requirement for employers in the city of Chicago. But higher level Illinois, yes, in 2020, employers were required to create policies and reporting procedures and train all employees on sexual harassment prevention. And that continues to be the case in present day. Now, as it relates to the city of Chicago, us at Tandem HR has initiated our campaign for our clients in the city of Chicago. And effective, the ordinance was amended last year, July. However, the effective date for employers to comply is due by the end of June, July 1st, or if you will. So what did Chicago actually do to amend the law? They created considerable sexual harassment prevention requirements that include stricter policy notices, poster requirements, training obligations, expanded the record keeping requirements, and then also stricter penalties for violations of not complying with the law. So what does that mean for the employees and you as employers? All employees, regardless of their employment status, so full-time, part-time, seasonal, temporary, or interns, must participate in 1 hour of sexual harassment prevention training and 1 hour of bystander training. Now, I'm going to highlight bystander training because that is an absolute new concept to the country in a sense. And I'll just provide an interesting fact that I learned that New York in 2019, actually, though, did require this part of the training in New York, but Chicago is different because it's the first jurisdiction in the country requiring a separate component, which is that full hour of bystander training. So again, all employees will have to take 1 hour of sexual harassment prevention training and 1 hour of bystander training. Now, if you're a supervisor or a manager and lead a team, you have to take 2 hours of harassment prevention training plus that 1 hour of bystander training. So, and one other highlight, there are some posting requirements that you would need to put in your coffee room, break room, or on your intranet. I think that's the way you said it, if you have an intranet and a remote workforce base. So other in the weed details that we can't get to today, but just some important dates. Again, employers, again, were required or are required by the end of this month to have that first round of training done. And then annually between July 1st and June 30th thereafter. And then just one more critical note that employers must retain a record of these trainings or certificates given your platform or learning management system. So if someone does walk and knock on the door, that you can show compliance, and you have to have records for at least 5 years on your employees. So just really important to note that Chicago harassment prevention training is kind of underway.
And I think what you're both talking about are some of the more recent changes to Illinois law compliance. But if I can zoom out just for a minute, there's still a lot of meat on the bone of, what are the compliance requirements for employers in X state. You've got, as we've heard here, we've got multiple tiers of laws that you have to comply with. You have municipal laws, you have state laws, you have federal laws. And we're not even mentioning the things that we often take for granted, like minimum wage. Overtime has to be calculated appropriately. If you're paying someone on salary, they have to be qualified as exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act rules. Just myriads of policies and things that you have to have in place. So what are the compliance requirements? I don't know that there's ever going to be a comprehensive list that you go down and, well, if you check all these boxes, you're compliant, because it's an ever-changing thing. And so it's something that you have to keep up with and just really incorporate into your day-to-day practices. So it's 11:45. We're a little short on time. We have lots of questions remaining. So I'm going to transition us to, let's see. This is an interesting question. Do you have an HR success story where you helped a manager reevaluate a decision to terminate an employee? This is chime in on.
I can take that one.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, when I was internal HR, we talked about this earlier during a performance review, or client employee manager comes to you and says, I'm ready to terminate somebody. I've had multiple conversations with this person. I'm done. We just need to terminate. I was able to convince that manager to move toward the performance improvement plan instead. Really evaluate. Let's take a look at what they're doing. Let's see what the training was like. Let's start from scratch and see what we can uncover. So luckily we did that, because what we found out that the individual didn't have the appropriate training. Whoever was training them wasn't the right person. they didn't have the right tools. I mean, come to find out, they didn't even have like the right systems set up so that they can do their jobs and didn't even know they needed to do a certain aspect of their job. So in the end, the employee was retained, relationship improved going forward, but we also uncovered a lot of things in that process from just the employer perspective, where we were looking at our recruitment strategy, onboarding and training processes, performance management, going back to those one-on-ones, making sure that as you're onboarding someone, you're having that communication, so you know day by day how things are progressing, and you don't just get to a point where it's just, that's done, we're done here. It's a hard thing to do, and managers are, they want to have those conversations. But if you think about it from the employee perspective, if I'm just talking to my employee and saying they need to improve, to them it seems like it may be a casual conversation until they start documenting something. Okay, now this is serious. We've got to see what's going on, uncover what we can, and if we can't move forward, then we might have to move toward termination. But let's see if we can salvage this, because as you mentioned before, Marcus, it is expensive to hire, train, and terminate and start that process all over again. So as much as you can do this and salvage that relationship, and in this case, I mean, I have a dozen of those kind of stories, which is why I love my job. But that one really stands out. That was a really great moment.
Yeah, it's amazing to me, working with clients. The termination is an immediate action. It's an immediate fix for that specific situation, but there are a lot of consequences that don't really show up on the balance sheet. And I've kind of done a deep dive on this, and I've seen estimates that cost of turnover can be anywhere from 1/3 of the employee's first year salary to 2 or 3 times their annual salary. Again, it depends on the position, depends on what they're doing, but those aren't things that jump off the page. They're kind of hidden costs, and it's in decreased productivity, and then decreased culture, decreased morale. So those are things that are hard to measure. And the other thing that I was thinking of as you were answering that is that doing the performance review or the PIP process, performance improvement process, the employer might learn some things that are uncomfortable. Hey, we actually didn't train this person very well. Well, I get that might be uncomfortable to learn, and there's some pride involved in, oh man, we didn't set this person up for success, but don't you want to know that? Don't you want to get that feedback on your business so that you can either address it or not? You got to make the best decision for your business, but if you don't know it, you can't make that consideration.
Right. And like was mentioned before, documenting it isn't step one in the process to terminate someone. It's step one in the process of figuring out what's wrong. How can we address it? How can we make it better to make it a win-win situation? So that's perfect.
Yeah. Great. We did get a question here. This seems a little specific, but it's what is the difference between working with an HR consultant and having a PEO or professional employer organization? So all of us on the panel here are in a way HR consultants, but what are the differences between working with a consultant and working with a PEO? Does anyone want to take a swing at that, or leave it for me to take a swing at?
I'll jump in real quick.
Yeah.
I think tying something back to what I said earlier, just maybe this is the challenge, maybe this is the opportunity. It's trying to find that sweet spot in a PEO relationship between the trust and the partnership that you have with them. We talked a lot about this in all the things that we talked about today, like establishing the trust by being able to be there for them, to give them the compliance knowledge that they need to take action, to make sure that you're coaching them and supporting them on critical performance discussions that they need. I think developing that relationship is the key differentiator in a PEO, because you recognize that there are things that you're going to do and things that the employer of choice is going to do, or the organization, and kind of navigating that relationship there. Recognizing that you're going to give advice. Sometimes the client is not necessarily going to take your advice, but recognizing that it's our obligation to make sure that they do have an awareness of the risk. They do understand the compliance consequences if they choose to take action. So I think all of those things go into the critical nature of the relationship in a PEO, kind of really establishing that foundation of trust so that you can build the relationship so that there's mutual respect on both sides.
Yeah, and I think, for me, that when I think about the difference there, it's, we will give you advice, but as a PEO, we have skin in the game too. We co-employ the employees, and so we have a vested interest in making sure that we are minimizing the risk of non-compliance, that we are taking control of the risk of paying people appropriately, as opposed to just like giving advice and then, hey, call me when you need me again. It's much more of a dynamic relationship, I think, the PEO relationship. And also there's the concept of like bundled services. So, payroll, workers' compensation, employee benefits, retirement accounts, all those things kind of bundled together, so that you're not managing multiple vendors. So I'd say HR consulting is one component to what we do, but it's not the only component. We did have a question here about, it's a very, very specific question. And so I'll read it. It's about leaves of absence. I don't know. Well, here, I'll read it and then I'll give my commentary on it. Being on an LOA, leave of absence, while my boss's company is in transition, who should take control of my LOA? That's very specific. I feel like there are a lot of questions I would want to know before I would offer a specific answer to that. And so, if the person who sent us that, if you want to reach out to me or any of the panelists directly, after the webinar, I'd be happy to talk to you about it. We'd want to understand the nature of the relationship and everything before we offer specific advice. But I would say, generally speaking, if there's an acquisition, if companies are merging, the purchasing company or the new employer generally is responsible for the leave of absence process. But again, a lot of factors involved. Hard to give a specific answer to that, but we see, I know, a lot of leave of absence questions. We deal with leaves of absence all the time. So I don't know if Jackie, I saw you go off of mute, if you want to talk a little bit about leaves of absence and how we help clients and employees work through that.
I was jumping off of mute just to, if there's a transition that's going on, again, if it's some kind of merger or acquisition, depending on what that date is, it may be the current employer, it could be the future employer. It's very tricky. And again, as Marcus was saying, leave of absence is very personal for every individual. Depends on the type of leave of absence that you need to take. We partner very closely with our clients as well as the individual themselves to talk about the leave of absence, what they need, how long they need it for. So it's hard to really answer that question without more context.
And I would just add, Marcus, that, when we do get presented with new clients, one of the first two questions that we ask is, do you have any employees on FMLA or a leave of absence? Yep. And, we take that information and then we manage that, once we go live with said client, in addition to workers' compensation injuries. So do you have any employees who are out on a workers' compensation leave? So those both kind of run or correlate with each other. So not just the LOA, but workers' compensation as well.
Yeah, I think there are, the different types of leave. You have, the FMLA, Family and Medical Leave Act, legally required leave. Then you have leave that's more permissive or more facts and circumstances, depends on the individual's situation, depends on the business's situation. So, those are things that it's kind of a, different shades of gray, different types of risk mitigation that you want to get into. But for all those reasons, it's very hard to answer that specifically. We have about 4 minutes left. I want to be respectful of people's time, but if there are any questions that we didn't get to, please use this opportunity to put them in the Q&A or in the chat. And I think we have a slide here at the end where we'll put up where we have our contact information. If you have questions after this, please reach out to us. This is something, this Ask the HR Expert webinar series is something that we're going to try and do on a more regular basis, hopefully monthly. This one was very, very general in nature. I would imagine that in the future, we'll try and do this, have like a general topic, like maybe, I think, what do you guys think? I think we could do a whole hour on leaves of absence. We could do a whole hour on, performance reviews, on benefit offerings and things like that. But I think our goal here at Tandem is to do this on a regular basis as a resource for clients, prospective clients, and so that we can bring other people from Tandem here to kind of show how we work with clients and how we can help. So let's see. No question. We got it. This is great. Loved it. Thank you very much. Yeah, this was kind of fun. So
Thanks
I guess
for moderating, Marcus.
Go ahead.
Appreciate the conversation.
Oh yeah, it was great. I love doing this. So we'll go ahead and end. I don't see any more questions, but again, if you have any questions after this, please shoot me an email and we'll get back to you. But thank you all very, very much for attending. Like I said at the beginning, you will get a recording of this webinar delivered to your email inbox so that you can watch it, distribute it, do whatever. But again, thank you all for attending, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks, panelists.
Thank you.